Welcome to Open Minds Radio with your host, Alejandro Rojas, former official spokesperson for the Mutual UFO Network. Alejandro has been a UFO paranormal researcher and journalist for nearly a decade and has logged hours in the field investigating the paranormal up close and personal. And now Open Minds Radio presents evidence and the latest news regarding the UFO phenomenon. Here's your host, Alejandro Rojas.
Hello and welcome to Open Minds Radio, your UFO news authority. This is your host, Alejandro Rojas, and we have another astounding show today. It's just going to be incredible, people. Our guest is Jim Nichols. He is an artist and UFO researcher. In fact, if you're into UFOs and you look at UFOs online, you've probably seen some of his art. He does a lot of really cool kind of retro art with UFOs, UFO crashes and incidents and stuff like that he's done research on. Really neat stuff. He used to paint southwestern landscapes in the desert. However, he was really into UFOs, so I guess when he looked at the desert, he's like, you know what? That needs a UFO in it. Thinking about UFO crashes. Plus, he was really into science fiction, so that got him into all of this. So we're going to be talking to him about that. And we're also going to be talking about the UFO Congress 2010 this year in February, because Jim was pretty much a hit there. He talked about Eisenhower and UFOs, and he also had a movie that was in the EBE Awards, shown is the word I was looking for earlier, about Aldebaran. This is Nazi UFO history and stuff like that. So this will be really cool. We'll be talking about this stuff and others. But yes, the 2011 UFO Congress is coming up, my friends, and it's no longer going to be in Laughlin, Nevada. I almost said Laughlin, Las Vegas. It's a very, very mini Las Vegas, and the median age there is a lot higher than in Las Vegas. But it's going to be here in the Phoenix metro area, out in the Fountain Hills area. It's actually going to be on the Yavapai Nation Indian Reservation at the Fort McDowell Resort. They have a casino on their grounds, a lecture area. It's just an absolutely gorgeous area. Beautiful. I mean, it is resort style. You people are going to be living in the lap of luxury, enjoying UFOs. The whole place is going to be bought up by UFO junkies like us, so you're just going to be able to talk UFOs with all of your friends. So it's going to be a lot of fun. This weekend, however, Open Minds is going to have our very own Michael Schratz speaking at the MUFON Symposium in Denver. You can go to MUFON.com to read more about that. And myself and my boss will be there schlepping our magazine. So if you live in Denver or you're going to the MUFON Symposium, come buy a magazine from me, even if you have one. Come and buy some more for gifts for your family, for your dad, your mom, your grandma. My grandma loves UFOs. Really, she's the one who got me and my cousin into that. We'll have my cousin on soon. We've been talking a lot about him. We'll talk some more about our incredible grandma. She's pretty cool. But one cool thing is our website, openminds.tv, where you can go right now, actually, and watch the radio show and chat with us. We have a live chat going on there. Say hello. But we also put UFO news on the website. And we have our news correspondent, Jason McClellan, to tell you all about some of the UFO news for the week. Jason.
Greetings, Alejandro.
Greetings.
Hello, Phoenix, and hello, world. This is your Open Minds News Brief for Monday, July 19th, 2010. There is a growing interest in the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrials, and this trend is benefiting Shag Harbour's UFO Museum in Nova Scotia, Canada. Attendance this year is up more than 70% from last year. Shag Harbour is the site of a famous UFO crash that occurred in 1967, where witnesses saw an unidentified flying object crash into the harbor. The Canadian government was involved in the investigation, and they even referred to the object as an unidentified flying object in government documents. Shag Harbour is basically Canada's Roswell, and like Roswell, Shag Harbour hosts an annual festival. The 2010 Shag Harbour UFO Incident Festival takes place August 6th and 7th, and if their attendance surge continues, They could have a great turnout at this year's event.
Maybe soon they'll have 1 million people. Wouldn't that be incredible?
1 million people?
Yeah. At a UFO thing. There's millions of people into this stuff. We probably have 1 million people listening tonight. It'd be neat if they all went to Shag Harbor. Actually, come to the Congress. Save your money. Come to the UFO Congress in
February 2011.
There's a lot of desert out there. You may have to bring a tent because we don't have that many hotel rooms. But hey,
there are plenty of hotel rooms, and there's a beautiful RV campground there right on the river.
Exactly.
Very nice.
I forget to mention the beautiful RV campgrounds.
In other news, a Chinese UFO report from 1947 was recently discovered in a July 1947 issue of the newspaper Commons Daily. The report details the story of a witness who observed a white and round object in the sky. The object zoomed off, and other objects followed. The witness called to her coworkers to come out and watch the UFOs with her. More than 80 of these flying plates appeared during the span of 1 hour. This event allegedly occurred just days after the Roswell incident in the U.S.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you go to the story, when I first went there and they said they found this document, it looked like this ancient papyrus or something, but it's actually just an old kind of yellow newspaper. I guess it's just because it's the Chinese symbols makes it look more antique.
I thought it was, this ancient document.
Yeah.
It's from the 40s.
Still pretty cool.
Very cool. In other news from China, I mentioned the popular story last week about the UFO over a Chinese airport that forced officials to divert air traffic and even close down the airport for an hour. News reports continue to come out about this story, but there is still no official explanation for the unidentified object. However, many of the news stories that have been coming out about this story have been more along the lines of gossip and rumors rather than well-researched journalism. And Alejandro, you recently wrote an article on OpenMinds.tv that explores some of this and points out some of the sloppy journalism made by major media organizations.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we got to throw some under the bus. ABC, LA Times, Huffington Post, all of these people are posting some of the stuff they got off of YouTube. So essentially what happens, a YouTuber goes up there and posts one of the pictures from the news stories of the UFO over the Chinese airport, and it was actually a picture just in the same period of time, same day in the same area, and then a bunch of pictures they just got off the internet of alleged UFOs, some of them which weren't, and they knew that when they grabbed them from the internet. But the news sources started grabbing this. ABC News claimed all of those pictures were from the UFO over China. And then LA Times grabs from YouTube a video of a missile flying over an area in a country I have a hard time pronouncing, which is right by Kazakhstan. It's essentially in between Kazakhstan and China. Kyrgyzstan, something like that, Kyrgyzstan. And this video was a missile taken on June 30th, but some YouTuber took that, said it was the UFO over China, and the LA Times and now the Huffington Post and all kinds of people are playing this video from YouTube saying that it's the UFO over this Chinese airport when it's not. It's shocking to me that these big news organizations would do no research, and I would imagine some of them covered that missile incident in June 30th.
It's really shocking, and it's really sloppy.
Yeah.
But definitely go to OpenMinds.tv and read that article. Alejandro did a great job sort of compiling some of that information and pointing out some of the errors in the reporting. In some bizarre news this week, what is being referred to as a chupacabra was found in Texas last week. Chupacabras are widely considered mythical creatures that are vampire-like dogs or some sort of alien creature that stalks and mutilates livestock. Texas Animal Control killed the savage creature on a farm in northern Texas. The animal control officer who killed the animal doesn't know what it is, but described it as being not normal and being extremely ugly. DNA testing is being done on the animal to determine what it really is, but after looking at the animal myself, I think it's clearly a dog.
Yeah, it's clearly that little Mexican dog.
It's a Mexican hairless dog.
And it's difficult to pronounce its actual name. It's like a Chihuahua.
Oh, I'm not even going to try. But
and they're cute little guys. They're not ugly, but they're weird, I guess, a bit. But
they're cute ugly. And
they're related to the Chihuahua, I'm pretty sure. But I think they're related to that dog that's considered the ugliest dog in the world, too. But still, there's no reason to kill it and call it a chupacabra.
And again, I mean, major media organizations grabbed onto this story and started hurling all sorts of rumors and saying it's a coyote or it's a chupacabra, but it's a dog. If you look at pictures of this Mexican hairless dog, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So. Anyway, here's an interesting sighting. 4 UFOs were reported over Vancouver, Washington last week. According to the report, Brenda Ellis was called outside by her brother, and before she got there, she heard her daughter scream, "What is that? What is that?" Ellis saw 4 unidentified flying objects dart back and forth in the night sky. She described the objects as orange bulbs that continued to dart across the sky as they ascended until they turned white and disappeared. The incident was reported to the National UFO Reporting Center, but local police say they weren't aware of any strange activity.
Mm-hmm. Lots of cool sightings all over the world that we've posted this week.
And a lot of the sightings now seem to be these orange bulbs, and a lot of them, are explained as Chinese lanterns, but a lot of them with these bizarre darting pattern of back and forth through the sky and then zooming upwards. Yeah, the Chinese lanterns don't dart back and forth, obviously, but and a lot during the 4th, because you mentioned Newfork and Peter Davenport, and he had a couple stories come out about a lot of sightings around the 4th. Hopefully I'm not scooping you there, and you're already going to mention that. And a lot of people were saying, oh, they're probably Chinese lanterns. But we don't know that for sure. And he was convinced that there were a definite increase this year on the 4th of anomalous objects. Right. And an update on the effort to create a European UFO Commission. Mario Borghezio, a member of the European Parliament, is making positive strides in his quest to create a European UFO Commission. Last month, Borghezio urged members of the European Union to publicly release their UFO files and to establish a European UFO Commission to look into UFOs. When I reported this story last week, he had already collected 18 signatures, and since then, Borghezio has managed to secure an additional 12 signatures, bringing his total to 30 signatures for his declaration. We'll keep an eye on this story to see how successful he is at convincing the remaining 706 members. Yep, AOL News posted an interview with him, which is really cool, where he's talking about how he's convinced about UFOs and that he's seen documents that the public can't see yet, that he can't talk about, that he thinks the public should know about. Wow. Yeah, interesting stuff. Well, I wish him luck. Yep. That's it for the news. Remember to check out these stories and more at OpenMinds.tv, your source for UFO-related news. I'm your Open Minds news correspondent, Jason McClellan, and you've been briefed. All right. Thank you, Jason. As we mentioned with the UFO China story, you can go to our website and read all about that, read about where the video comes from, which is on its own a very interesting story because nobody's claimed this missile that was, recorded on June 30th, so it's still a mystery. We also have a story on Colonel Corso and essentially a memorial to him and the anniversary of his passing, and some really cool UFO photos from Rhode Island in 1967, part of the Wendell Stevens archives. Stay tuned. We'll be talking to Jim Nichols after the break.
Open Minds Production is proud to present the 20th anniversary of the International UFO Congress, coming to its new home at the Radisson Fort McDowell Resort and Casino in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is the premier annual event for UFO researchers, enthusiasts, and the general public with an interest in mysterious phenomena. Come listen to expert ufologists, government officials, and respected scientists presenting information relating to UFOs, extraterrestrials, crop circles, abductions, cover-ups, and more at the largest UFO conference in the country. The 20th anniversary of the International UFO Congress takes place February 23rd through February 27th. Visit UFOcongress.com for more information, including sponsorship and vendor opportunities.
You're listening to Open Minds Radio with Alejandro Rojas on KFNX News Talk Radio 1100.
Welcome back to Open Minds Radio. Something I did want to mention, and it's something in the Phoenix metro area, thanks to one of the chatters, Casper, for reminding me of this, but Fact or Faked, a television show that was on essentially covering the Phoenix lights, and they went with a local researcher, Jeff Willis, actually someone who comes into the office, a friend, and they went out to investigate this thing and to debunk it and do their own tests, and they recorded UFOs themselves, lights in the sky, using their night vision that were moving around, going back and forth and bouncing around and staying still. Really weird stuff. Yeah, I think someone in the chat, if you're in one of our chats, our Blog Talk chat, posted the link to the YouTube. Really cool stuff there. Anyway, we have a great guest. We've got our UFO artist and researcher, Jim Nichols, and I believe he's on the line. Jim, are you there?
I believe I'm on the line, yes.
All right, your belief is true. I can hear you.
Yes, we're loud and clear, yes?
So did you see that television show, that Fact or Faked?
No, I didn't. But that's interesting. I've been watching another Fact or Fake thing about the moon landing here.
Oh, yeah.
Which is very interesting.
Yep. A good show. So
yes.
You were more pretty much a conventional artist doing desert landscapes and things like that, and your art is beautiful, it's wonderful, and then somehow you transitioned into doing the UFO art. How did that come about?
Well, I'd always I've never seen a UFO myself, actually. So it was a way of, it's always been an interest to me, but it was a way I could kind of vicariously be a UFO experiencer by doing the UFO artwork. But it was it's a meeting with I met Wendell Stevens in 1980, and he was investigating the Billy Meyer contact, and I was so impressed by his efforts in that investigation that it kind of precipitated me becoming a UFO artist.
Wendell, and did you meet him out in Tucson?
Yeah, Wendell was living in Tucson at the time, and actually he had put together an investigative team, and they were shuttling back and forth to Switzerland, trying to make some sense out of the Billy Meyer case. And he would share photographs with me, and of course his stories of his research and so forth. And I became so fascinated by that particular case that I started doing some illustrations, actually specifically based on the Meyer case. Mm-hmm. And then it just kind of evolved out of that.
Eventually you did some artwork of the Roswell kind of scene that people had witnessed. Where did you get your information to create that scene that you made? Because it's probably one of your more popular pieces, it seems.
I did a painting. It was kind of a generic. It was not specifically the Roswell crash, but it shows like a flying saucer, classic flying saucer on the ground with like American Army military personnel examining it. But then later I did another painting during the specifically for the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash back in '97, and that illustration is actually based on Kevin Randall's research, in that it wasn't the classic saucer design. It was more like a flying wing, and it shows that the structure of the craft has been breached, and there's bodies on the ground. And actually, that's based on the alleged actual crash site there north of Roswell, where eyewitnesses claim they saw this craft on the ground.
Yeah, it's a great picture, and I should let people know you can go to JimNicholsUFOArt.com to see more of his artwork. And both of these pictures he just mentioned are on the front page of that site. It's JimNicholsUFOArt.com. So at some point, you then also became a researcher.
Yeah, it just kind of naturally evolved. I wanted to do illustrations that were reasonably authentic, based on eyewitness accounts and historical accounts. So I try to recreate the scene as if the observer of the artwork could see the picture and get a sense of how the actual scene may have been.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I love about it is, because I think of your accuracy, it really feels like, especially maybe it goes for anyone, but especially for a researcher, it feels like you're there. It's like the scene in your head when you go and read these people's books and you think about these incidents. It's like you've portrayed that, and it really feels like you're there.
Right. Well, that's what I've tried to do.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So in The UFO Congress last year, or no, this year, in February, I always think of it as last year because it's the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
But you did a couple of different research that you had shown that was pretty popular. The first one being your talk on Eisenhower and his links to UFOs.
That's such an amazing myth that's been kicked around the UFO research for a long time, and I've been very reluctant to give it any credibility. But it's one of those stories that just simply will not go away. And there's anecdotal stories in bits and pieces in numerous books, numerous UFO investigative reports, where they just briefly touch on it. If this is the President of the United States having actual face-to-face contact with extraterrestrials, this is an event that's at least as important, if not more so, than Roswell itself. And so it's like, I think it's time somebody really put all these little anecdotal stories together in one presentation. And it's like, let's go back and look at this event and try to shed some light on whether it actually happened or not. And more, seems like more people are coming out of the woodwork with more little bits and pieces to the story that give it more credibility. So I think it's an extremely important piece of UFO research.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about it now? Do you feel that it probably did happen or not? Or are you still on the fence?
First, it's like I have to be very cautious with this. It's like nobody can prove it.
Mm-hmm.
If it actually happened, the government has covered its tracks so well. It's almost impossible to prove that it happened. But actually, kind of based on President Eisenhower's comments just as he was leaving office in 1961, where he warned about the growing power of the military-industrial complex. You wonder if that wasn't kind of if the UFO issue or his contact in 1954 was maybe a subtext that he couldn't, specifically, reveal, but he was talking about the consequences, the possible negative consequences that our nation was facing based on that contact he allegedly had in 1954, because it would have created a government within the government that would have to be kept secret from administration to administration.
Yeah.
And it would be the impetus behind the growing power of the military-industrial complex.
Yeah, we'll get back
I was concerned about.
onto this. It's certainly a prophetic statement that he made, and we'll talk more about this after the break, so stay tuned.
This is Open Minds Radio. Here again, your host, UFO paranormal researcher and journalist, Alejandro Rojas.
Welcome back to Open Minds Radio. We are speaking with Jim Nichols, UFO artist and researcher, and we're talking about a great idea that he had and going out there and looking into the mythology of Eisenhower meeting with extraterrestrials and putting all that together in a talk that he did at the UFO Congress in 2010. And I wanted to ask you, Jim, I know there's some controversy. One of the items is where this alleged meeting might have actually happened, and it seems like people don't necessarily agree on that point.
Well, I don't think, apparently there's more than one meeting. So I think it was either this meeting or that meeting. I think it was probably multiple meetings. And there seems to be a fairly general consensus that there was a serious meeting contact at Muroc, which is, of course, Edwards Air Force Base near Palm Springs, in February of 1954. And when allegedly Eisenhower was there in February to play golf, and this is February 20th, and there's no president out on the golf links playing golf. So the press went crazy, thinking that President Eisenhower was ill. One press agency released that he'd had a heart attack, and then another, which was followed up by another press agency saying he had died. And finally, Eisenhower's press secretary called a press conference at the Mirador Hotel there in Palm Springs and said, no, every president is fine. He was eating some chicken at a friend's house, and he broke a tooth, and he had to be rushed to a dentist for a dental treatment. And of course, allegedly that actually never happened, that he had been secreted away to Muroc Air Base for a prearranged contact meeting with extraterrestrials, where he was shown actual flying saucer aircraft, and he actually got to meet face-to-face with extraterrestrials. Now, that's one story. Then the following year, I think Art Campbell has information that Eisenhower met with extraterrestrials again at Holloman Air Force Base in February of 1955. Well, in this case, Eisenhower's plane, the Columbine 3, landed at the base, taxied to a deserted part of the runway, where it was met by a flying saucer. The disc landed. Eisenhower was seen. Eyewitnesses claim that Eisenhower was seen alone leaving Air Force One and entering the saucer, and he was on board the saucer for at least 45 minutes. And then he came out again later alone. So those are the two primary stories that I'm aware of. Mm-hmm. And I think they're both, there seems to be eyewitness accounts to verify both of these.
What on either meeting, what do you think, have you ran across as the best evidence that, this happened?
Well, there's, of course, Art Campbell has eyewitness accounts of the Holloman Air Force Base landing. There's a fascinating story that has surfaced from the Vatican that verifies the 1954 encounter in California, in that Bishop James McIntyre, was head of the diocese in Los Angeles, was allegedly present with Eisenhower for this contact. And a liaison precipitated from that between both the Vatican and an extraterrestrial group. And in light of the Vatican's recent statements about the possibility of extraterrestrial life, I don't know, it tends to make me think, well, maybe the Vatican knows more about this than we've been led to believe, and in part based on this contact that happened with Eisenhower, the Vatican representative from Los Angeles back in 1954. So it's like, you can't prove any of this stuff, but it's fascinating conjecture.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the more interesting aspects of all of this also is the Air Force seemingly to keep life to this story because of allegedly they've offered various researchers, and including Disney, according to Robert Emenegger, who worked for Disney, to show some film of Eisenhower meeting ETs, which they never provided.
Right. Exactly, because the encounter in 1954 in California was allegedly photographed with newsreel cameras. So somewhere, some way, somehow, there's footage that could verify that.
One of the, I think, have you seen that Disney documentary they put together where they were?
Yes,
I think,
I have seen it. Mm-hmm.
The Emenegger has said in the past, I've heard him say that, no part of that film was actually part of, the real Air Force film, but there's one piece that's in question where you see what seems to be Holloman or Edwards, some long strip, and you see this little white dot, which is very similar to a lot of UFO footage out there, coming down, and it's just for a split second that you see part of this film, and it doesn't look like CG work at all. Have you seen that piece I'm talking about?
No, I haven't seen it, but I'm sure there's little teasers that they leak out to the press every once in a while.
Yeah. Now, another, controversial, and it's cool. It's a lot of fun. It's great that I love it when people tackle in a sober manner the more difficult, the more mythological pieces of all of this puzzle, because you've also tackled in a documentary that you worked on that won an EBE award at the UFO Congress, Aldebaran, and Aldebaran, I think is the way it's supposed to be said. Yes, Aldebaran. Mm-hmm. And that entire mystery. Could you talk about that for us?
Well, that's the German saucer mystery. That's another another one of my favorite UFO myths that over the years it just won't go away. I remember hearing this way back in the 80s talk about German saucers, and I thought at the time it was just ludicrous. But since then, I've done my own research and have looked into this a little bit more. Look at a little more depth, and it seems this is another myth that over the years it gains more and more evidence that suggests that when there's smoke, there's fire, and that yes, during World War II, the Germans were in fact building circular flying machines, and the real conjectures were they conventionally powered, or were the Germans developing free energy anti-gravity propulsion systems? And there's a significant amount of evidence to suggest that that's exactly what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've got in our 4th issue a story on this whole incident, which I'm really excited about because I got to look more into it. And it was the mercury part was interesting, that they were using some ancient Indian texts that talked about spinning hot mercury, which is something we've heard in other places as well as mercury propulsion that they were using.
Mercury vortex engines, yes. If you read, I first came across this in Desmond Leslie's book, Flying Saucers Have Landed. It's the book where he examines the George Adamski encounter in that. And then he also has another section in the book where he talks about the ancient Vimanas that are described in the ancient Indian Sanskrit texts that go back thousands of years. And that they very matter-of-factly said, yes, they were developing, they had machines that could fly in the air, could levitate, and could actually fly in space based on mercury vortex anti-gravity propulsion systems.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you look at history one way, these things sound preposterous, but if you look at history from another point of view, it's like, this stuff makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And you have to understand that Germany was up against both the Brits and the Americans, and both of these nations kind of had the monopoly on petroleum. Mm. So the Germans would have been pressed to develop some kind of free energy propulsion systems, where they could eliminate their codependency on petroleum. And you wonder, well, it's like that seemed to be a heads-up idea for the Germans going to war against the United States and Britain.
Right, makes sense. So we've got to take another break. We'll be right back, and one person I want to talk about is the beautiful Maria Orsic. I looked her up, and we'll talk about her, and she's absolutely gorgeous. It was amazing. But we'll be talking about her in just a minute, just after this break, so stay tuned. We're talking to Jim Nichols, UFO artist and researcher, currently about Aldebaran and Nazi connections to possible UFOs and anti-gravity devices that they had built back in the 40s. Stay tuned.
Are you or someone you know looking for the latest movies and publications containing information about UFOs and extraterrestrials? The Open Mind store is stocked with books, DVDs, and other merchandise, including Open Mind magazine, the leading bi-monthly magazine that explores the UFO phenomenon. Single issues, as well as yearly subscriptions of Open Minds magazine, are available in the store for both domestic and international customers. The recently expanded DVD offerings include dozens of documentaries and conference presentations by experts in the field of ufology. The ever-expanding line of products, including DVDs, books, and branded Open Minds merchandise, make the Open Minds store an online destination worth visiting frequently. Browse the store today at store.openminds.tv to see the latest editions.
Welcome back to Open Minds Radio. Here now, former official spokesperson for the Mutual UFO Network, your host of Open Minds Radio, Alejandro Rojas.
Welcome back. This is Alejandro Rojas, and we are having a very interesting conversation with Jim Nichols, and we're talking about not the planet from Star Wars, Alderaan, because Jason just reminded me. I get confused with that. But
I wonder if that's where George Lucas got the idea from.
I think it's entirely possible. It'd be great to be able to ask him one day. But the planet Aldebaran, which was channeled by this Maria. Is that correct?
Well, actually, Aldebaran is the brightest star in the constellation Taurus. It's actually the bull's eye. But allegedly there are inhabited planets orbiting that star. And in 1919, a strikingly beautiful lady in Germany, or in Austria actually, by the name of Maria Orsic, claims to have made telepathic contact with beings from that planet, and that the German flying saucer technology was based on the channeling that this lady had established.
Right. Very, like you said, it's hard to, at first you think, oh yeah. But, I mean, these were very important. This medium, Maria Orsic, was, held in pretty high esteem amongst the well-off people in Germany, it would seem.
This is not a lark. This is more like we would consider remote viewing. Mm-hmm. This is a very serious business very serious activity that they were involved with, and they saw themselves as facilitators of the Aquarian Age. That the Aquarian Age was about to burst upon humanity, which would bring forth advanced technologies, and humanity would develop utopian societies based on the technologies that would be coming forth in the Aquarian Age. And they saw them very seriously, saw themselves as facilitators of this. And the technologies that they were developing based on these telepathic transmissions appeared to be actually very viable free energy technologies. Mm-hmm. And of course we know that free energy technologies are very greatly suppressed in our current culture. I mean, Nikola Tesla in 1914, just before World War I, had erected a tower on Long Island, which would have been the forerunner of a technology that would allow free energy, free electrical energy for everybody on the planet, had it not been squelched by the powers that be, the robber barons and the oil corporations of that time, because they couldn't exploit people financially with this technology.
Right. That was Tesla's issue with those guys. He was more about doing things.
J.P. Morgan, well, I can't make any money on this.
Yeah.
So these free energy technologies are out there. It's just they've been heavily suppressed.
Yeah. Now, from what I understand, too, the real and these societies that were doing these channelings were part of the Dual Society, if I'm saying it right. I've never known Thule, or I've heard different pronunciations of society, which was an important organization in Germany that time that was sponsoring Hitler and his party.
Well, actually, the Maria Orsic and the ladies that she was, the remote viewers that she was working with were of the Vril Society. And it was members of the Thule Society that took her channeling and translated it and worked it up into actual prototypes of flying machines. Mm-hmm. And it also members of the Thule Society that were Adolf Hitler's mentors.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, these were important organizations by leaders in the community.
So. Absolutely. Yeah.
Rather as just...
right, like the Nazi SS evolved out of the Thule Society.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's a terribly interesting story, and it would be wonderful to find out eventually the truth around some of this, because it would mean, like you said, that they've tapped into some energy and propulsion devices very long time ago that we could all be using right now.
Well, I don't know if you remember the old movie Forbidden Planet.
Yes.
1956. Well, it's very interesting, and during from the end of World War II until 1960, there was general conjecture that anti-gravity propulsion systems were being developed, and that at any time that they were going to be revealed to the public. And if you go back and see the movie Forbidden Planet, you'll see that the flying saucer in Forbidden Planet is not flown by aliens. It's a flying saucer flown by people from planet Earth. It's flown by humans. And there's one sequence in the film where they actually take the propulsion system out of the flying saucer, and it's this electromagnetic coil. So it's like that movie actually was a precursor of presenting to the public the idea of anti-gravity propulsion. Mm-hmm. But then in 1960, the whole thing got shut down. It all got locked away in secret projects and was never talked about again. And what did we see all through the 60s? We saw rockets. We saw petroleum-based technology that dominated and still dominates to this day.
Right. In a lot of these movies and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. I remember a what the heck is that show? One of those real popular shows where they used to, do a lot of sci-fi, and Twilight Zone, where they were flying saucers, and they crashed one and had to fix it, and they were caught in actually this time loop in this show, but a lot more forward and more out there, out of the box, which, we're always talking about thinking back then, than it seems like we have now.
Yeah, it's all closed down now.
It's all very simple. Story and plot lines are very simple. Aliens come, we fight the aliens, we win or whatever. And that's one reason I like a lot of the Japanese stuff I watch. They have much more complicated plot lines, and it's more realistic where it's always, although we still have this in some of our sci-fi, the big corporations are taking advantage of people.
Right, yeah.
And taking over control of space, which is unfortunately seeming like the direction we're headed in.
Well, it doesn't have to be. There are alternatives, and people just need to be more aware of that.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the things you're working on now? What are some of the other interests you have in this field?
Well, we can talk about the article we just published in Open Minds magazine about the Vatican.
Oh, right, yeah. You mentioned a little bit of that earlier, but here again, some of the mythology that's more controversial out there.
Right. We have the current issue of Open Minds magazine has an article that I wrote about Vatican disclosure, and where my conjecture is that we may see the Vatican taking much more frontline position on disclosure regarding extraterrestrials than our own government. Mm-hmm. And I think that bears very close watching. The Vatican just opened their Lucifer telescope on Mount Graham.
Right. Why the heck they would choose that name?
Isn't that interesting?
Doesn't seem like their marketing person was...
Actually, it's an acronym for the telescope, or the mirror in the telescope itself. But then this leads to another area of conjecture. It's like this is one of the world's largest binocular infrared telescopes.
Yep.
And you know that the alleged Planet X that may be out there, Nibiru, is only visible in the infrared band.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We're out of time right now, but
Yes.
It was perfect because you plugged the magazine and you plugged your story in the magazine, so everybody can go get the Vatican issue of our magazine to check out Jim's story. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Sure.
We'll definitely have you on again. Next week, we have Deddie Zigamare. She's a MUFON state director in Missouri, where they've got a flap going on, a lot of interesting stuff, including the Marley Woods, where they see lots of lights and weird things happening there. And she's having a conference out there next month, so we'll be talking about that. So join us next week. Thank you for listening to Open Minds Radio, your news authority. Talk to you next week. Bye.